Bonjour, bienvenue chez Mémé. Welcome to Mémé's. Today we're going to make a wonderful summer appetizer, bruschetta. We're going to use some beautiful ripe Roma tomatoes, some fresh herbs as well as a little bit of dried, some balsamic vinegar and olive oil, garlic, onion, salt and pepper, and that's all there is to it. So our first step is going to be to dice these tomatoes. And I'm just going to quarter them. And then cut them into small strips and cube that up. And you want to get some nice ripe tomatoes that are a little juicy, but you don't want them mushy. You still want the tomato to retain its integrity so that you got a little bit of texture when you're eating the bruschetta. So I'm using 6 ripe tomatoes today, and I've already chopped up 5 of them here. So I'm just going to go ahead and use these, and we'll continue on with the next step. So after we dice the tomatoes, we're going to start on our fresh herbs. I'm going to use a little bit of parsley. You can use what herbs you have available. I like to use as much fresh as possible, with the exception of oregano. Sometimes the oregano that's fresh doesn't have the best flavor and it's a little tough, so I like to use dried oregano. But otherwise I'm using some fresh parsley, some fresh basil. And the easiest way to get these ready is to just stack your basil leaves up on there in a little pile. And I'm just going to bunch my parsley in there and roll it all up. I'm going to chiffonade it, which just means to cut it into tiny strips. And then after I chiffonade it, so I don't have big pieces of herb in there, I'm going to go back through and just chop it up a bit. Now you can use as much or as little of these herbs as you want. I like the fresh herbs because they bring a little green, springy, fresh flavor to the bruschetta. Okay, I'm going to chop up some onion, and you don't need a lot of onion. You want the flavor of the onion, but you don't want any big chunks, so I'm going to mince this up pretty fine. And I'm just going to cut through, and then I'm just going to slice it as thin as I can, going the other way. So I get some very tiny pieces of onion, and you don't need a lot. The star of the show should be your tomatoes. So I'll go ahead and put my onion in there. Okay. I do use dried rosemary. You never want to use raw rosemary in something. It's too tough and chewy. So I'm just going to use a little bit of the powdered. And again, I am going to use some dried oregano, and I like to crush it up in my hand so that the oils are released in the oregano. You get more flavor out of it. When I'm making bruschetta, I do like to use fresh ground black pepper. You get a little more of that sharpness from the pepper in contrast to the sweet tomatoes. And then salt, you can put in now. I tend to put it in before I serve it because the salt tends to drain the juice out of the tomatoes, and I want to keep them nice and full and juicy. And then you're going to add 2 to 1 on your olive oil to vinegar. So I'm going to start out with 2 spoonfuls of oil and 1 of some good balsamic vinegar. And then you're going to stir that up and see if it's moist enough, if you need some more olive oil or some more vinegar. I think I would like a little more of these. So I'm going to do 1 more on the olive oil and 1/2 on the vinegar. Okay, so that's our bruschetta. I'll be right back. So as I was starting to clean up, I realized I forgot one of the most important ingredients, which is garlic. You can use fresh garlic. I actually like to use jarred garlic for this because it's minced very fine and it's a little less sharp. And again, you can put in as much or as little garlic as you like. I'm going to put in about a teaspoonful and mix that in. Okay, and then we're going to set that aside. And we're going to continue on. We're going to toast some bread for our bruschetta. Let me just wipe this up a bit. Okay. And I've got a nice baguette from the grocery store. I've got sourdough. You don't have to get sourdough. You can actually use almost any kind of bread you want. And what you're going to do is slice it into rounds. So you can slice them just straight on like this. Or if you like to be a little more fancy, and I'm going to have to waste a piece to show you, put them a bit on the diagonal. But really it's up to you, and you just want to slice them about that thick, not too thick. And then we're going to spread with some olive oil and a little bit of seasoning and put them in the oven for 300 degrees about 20 minutes or until the bread is crispy but not hard. So I went ahead and sliced up half the loaf. That should be enough for my husband and I, and I'll use the rest of the loaf for breadcrumbs or something. I'm just going to drizzle with a little bit of olive oil. Now normally, if I were doing this strictly for the bruschetta, I would also sprinkle maybe with a little garlic, salt, maybe a little rosemary or basil or something. But because these are going to go on a charcuterie board, I'm going to just do the olive oil just to get them a little toasty. Again, into the oven, 300 degrees for about 20 minutes. I'm going to flip them over halfway so I can get both sides toasted well. So while the bread is toasting, let's talk about some options. You can use other herbs in your bruschetta if you like. For example, some fresh thyme. And thyme is very easy to get off the stem. Just slide your fingers across it and it comes right off. You can use those leaves just as they are. I tend to chop them up just a bit so that it's a little finer in the bruschetta. So we've got some thyme. You could put in some fresh chives. Now I know we have onion in there, but a little bit of fresh chives. It's going to give it a brighter flavor. You could put in marjoram. You could even put in tarragon, give it a little more of a French twist. So it's whatever herbs you have at hand, especially if you can get fresh herbs. But again, when you're using fresh herbs in a raw application like in a bruschetta, you do not want to use a hard herb like rosemary. You want to use soft herbs like basil or this beautiful thyme that I got. So I'm going to go ahead and mix these in since we talked about it. Just give it a little extra pizzazz there. And you can serve the bruschetta just on crackers, but I like to make those homemade toasted bread rounds. It really just gives a contrast between the crispy bread and then the juicy tomatoes, and it's a wonderful summertime appetizer. So our toasted bread is done. Time to assemble. I'm going to take some of the bruschetta and I'm going to put it in a bowl. Now this is the point where I would add the salt. Again, you don't want the salt to drain out all the beautiful juices out of the tomatoes. So I'm going to just sprinkle of salt in here. And a little bit more tomato on top. And I'm just going to mix that up so that the salt's mixed in. Okay, and then you would just arrange the toasted bread onto your platter. A little hot, so I'm going to try not to burn myself. My husband loves it when I'm filming because he comes home from work. He's a school teacher, and he gets a wonderful snack or a preview of what's for dinner. And of course, the last thing I'm going to have to do here is give this a taste. So here goes. And it is a little messy. Just be ready to catch. I really like the addition of the chives. It gave it a little more bright flavor. The toasts are beautifully crunchy. I flipped them over halfway through, but I didn't put any more olive oil on top because the olive oil does soak through all those nooks and crannies in your sourdough. So I hope you try this out. Make this delicious appetizer for someone you love.